So thank you. So today we are talking about the state of conversational design, and actually I found out it's called conversation design. So even the title I have found is slightly inaccurate according to how the industry thinks about it and talks about it. And I think, I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, but when I was growing up, as a matter of fact, when I was in high school, this movie came out and it's Star Trek, I think it's The Last Voyage Home, 1996, or maybe it's 1986 actually. Now I have to remember when it was. But this is that famous scene that Serena actually had to look up where he expected the computer to talk back to him and picked up the mouse to make it happen. And we're just at a point now where when you do talk to your computer, it is starting to respond. You might have to say, hey, Google or Alexa to wake it up, but computers are responding. So we're in that time where we're not quite there yet. So we're not quite at the final frontier. And so today I wanted to talk about voice and voice UX and conversation design from the perspective of a design leadership person that's in an organization. So what's happening with voice and what do I need to know as a design leader? And are we ready to consider a voice UX strategy in our organization, in our product line, et cetera? And what are the tools and the terms and the technologies that I need to understand to even talk about it in my organization, kind of without sounding stupid? And then what are the basics of conversation design? How do we get started? What are the best tools and resources? So these are the things that I'm going to talk through today. It's going to be about half an hour, and then there'll be room for questions and things like that at the end. So lots and lots and lots of stats. There was this great Accenture report that came out and said, one of the reasons why companies weren't moving forward with conversation design is because 60% of the businesses said they could not find the right resources or talent. So talent and finding people that have, quote, experience in this space or that want to learn more about the space is one of the big sticking points for companies wanting to move forward. There is a lot of stats like chatbot market is expected to grow 2.6 billion. What does that mean exactly? I think that one big stat that came out in some of the reports that I was looking at is that the spend, especially in the enterprise space on mobile, is now diminished by the spend on chat. Now that might be because people have their mobile strategy in place. They feel pretty comfortable with where mobile is in terms of their lineup. And now they realize they need to add chat, add different kinds of feedback to round out their customer experience. There was a big rise, of course, during the pandemic of use of chatbots. People didn't want to leave their homes. They were trying to deal with customer service at a whole different level. And so chatbot usage rose by almost 130%. And then there was a great resource, actually, Hillary Black, which I reference at the end of the session, where UX Magazine said that conversation designer is the fastest growing role in 2020. So what does this mean? I've been getting emails. This has been part of the conversation. I see this on LinkedIn. People are asking about, hey, what's your experience building chat, building conversations in these tools like VoiceFlow, Bot Composer, Bot Society, et cetera, et cetera. And it started this conversation in a group that I'm in, and I was able to have some really good talks with a few people in the space to find out, hey, where are we? And we're kind of in the same place too as an organization. So looking at voice UX, it's also voice user interfaces, VUI. It's really a lot of different things. It's just this interaction between people and devices. And it can be through voice, it can be through text, it can be through different means. So some of the terms that you may have heard or that you see are voice user interface, it's VUI, voice interaction design, voice UX, and then conversation design. Someone said conversational design is a very talky designer. So, these are different terms that are being used currently. And then the way that people are kind of putting job postings out and the titles that they're using are conversational AI designer, chatbot customer experience designer, conversation designer, and voice user interface designer, to name a few. So yes, this crosses over between UX, product focused, CX, marketing focus, and there's a lot of crossover in linguistics and content as well. So it's kind of a big open space right now, ripe for growth. So the thing that I really do want you guys to take away from this talk is this slide. So concentrate on this for a little bit. So on the left, we have flow-based, which are rules-based conversations. It's decision tree-based, it's predetermined, and these are programmed responses. So you think about if you have a chatbot and you enter some information and it gives you options, hey, press A for this, B for this, C for this, or 1, 2, 3. These are basically interactions that are pre-programmed and they're automated. Now on the flip side of this, maybe it's not the flip side, but on the other spectrum is intent-based. And so that's natural language processing plus AI. But we aren't talking about her AI or HAL AI. We're talking about machine learning. And so AI, there's two flavors of AI. There's weak and strong. And thankfully, at least from the dystopian future perspective, we are in the weak AI category still. And a lot of people in the sort of the field kind of talk about it as being natural conversations, multi-turn dialogue, where it goes back and forth. And the secret here is that sometimes you have intent-based natural language processing start the conversation, and then it moves into a rules-based end result. And so there are examples of that. And I'm going to show you some, I think, best practices, and I'd be interested in hearing other people's experiences to see what we think is working and not working in the space currently. So talk to Susan Hura. It's actually the wife of Paul Sherman, and she's been in this space for as long as you can. She used to create conferences and things like that. Her focus is as a PhD on conversation design. And one of the things that she said was a lot of what a good conversation designer does is similar to what any good UX designer does. So we are not all lost. It is very similar. And I'm going to kind of show you some of the similarities and where we can tie in our UX knowledge into voice. So this is kind of an example. This is a flow looking at what the channels are of interaction. But the biggest piece here is having some kind of approach or strategy that when you are thinking about voice, like you have to really think, well, what is the strategy behind it? Why are we doing this? Is it just because it's a new cool technology? We need to keep up with everything else going on. So understanding your goals from customer and business perspectives really does help you define your voice UX approach. And a lot of it is based on intent. Now, intent can mean a lot of different things. And I had shown you in that previous slide that it was mostly over the NLP, the natural language processing, and the AI mode. But intent really is things that we look at every day, like what is the brand voice? What's the brand promise? What's the personality of that brand? What's the persona? Who's coming to your site? What are their needs, right? We do this all the time with journey mapping, et cetera. What is the intent that someone has? And speaking of journey maps, where are they at their stage of the journey? And when are they interacting with voice as part of that process? Is it a voice app or is it part of a customer service? They started with a phone call, they end up doing chat, they get back on the phone. Where is that person at and what is the intent? What are the methods and the modes that they're using? What are the devices that they're interacting with in order to get there? And then in the end, what is the task they're trying to complete? So are they trying to buy something, learn something, talk? Are they controlling? What is it that they're really trying to get? And is it just a notification, for instance? So this back and forth between a chat interface, be it voice or text, can have a lot of different pieces that relate to the user experience. And it's something that we really have to understand as we talk, type, and tap. There's multimodal aspects to this. There's also another aspect, which is accessibility, which we'll talk about just a little bit in terms of people that can't talk or type or tap at a particular moment, whether they're situationally disabled in that moment or whether it's an ongoing chronic condition. So the main frameworks, of course, that we want to look at are Apple, Amazon, and Google. Actually, Microsoft has changed their framework over time. They used to have something called Cortana, which they have exited from. Now we're looking at Microsoft Bot framework. So the big three are actually Apple, Amazon and Google, as we know, and then the distribution methods are all over the place. So we are now talking about an ecosystem that we have to understand where people are in the process, what they're doing, and what they're trying to accomplish. So there are a lot of tools, and I did start to organize these and put them into a chart and try and understand what they were, how they were used, which are the ones that we should be looking at. And I realized at some point during this process why I was going so completely crazy, because there are over 1,000 chatbot creation tools available today. I kid you not. So looking at which ones work really depends on what is the use case, what are the outlets that you're building for, what kind of technology needs to be embedded, and are you looking at rules-based, right, or NLP? And so with all of that, here's a few examples of no-code dialogue creators. And we've definitely, even at GoToMedia, tested a few of these to see what we might use. So this is BotMock, and it's kind of a flow-based kind of interaction design that takes both design and a little bit of programming know-how to make it work. But it's really pretty straightforward, and there is no code that's needed. So this is an example of Bot Society, and here's a little clip showing how you can also use an emulator to see how it's actually going to appear in that format that you're designing it for. So we'll continue to research internally to see what we think we want to use at our organization, but there's 1,000 tools out there, so there's a lot to look at. So this is just an example of using this in Slack, in mobile, in website format, but these are all really meant for kind of that predetermined flow. So why are chatbots not delivering? So I think you guys have probably had a bad experience. And I also talked to Frederick, Lisa's husband, and he's a voice expert, used to work at Nuance. And he was saying, it's really frustrating because sometimes it's badly implemented. And for instance, you're on an Anthem Blue Cross page and you go to the chat and they ask you what you're there for, and it sends you a link back to the page that you were already on. So being context aware and implementing solutions that are actually going to help someone move forward are really important. So there was a lot of, surveys and data. And so these were some of the reasons why people weren't fully comfortable with chatbots. Privacy is a major concern. People are concerned about sensitive data. Obviously, with tools like Alexa and Hey Google, people feel, even if it's storing just a little bit of their data, that their data is not, that they are not having private conversations. A lot of people said 48% of customers said if they had a bad experience once, they're not going to want to use it a second time. So you kind of have a one shot to make a good experience happen. Almost 50% felt like chat was keeping them away from a live agent. I'm sure you felt that. Serena is one of the first people that said, hey, if you go to an IVR system, just hit zero, hit zero, hit zero, and eventually you will get an agent. And I can't tell you how many times I do that just to get an agent. So there's a lot of reasons why people aren't trusting that chat experience. And so if you're building something, we do need to take that into consideration and create something that's really going to work. So this is an example of a chatbot fail. Here's this middle one is all about don't send paragraphs at a time, make it feel chatty back and forth in small snippets, and keep the context alive. And so you really need to understand if you're getting some kind of feedback, if someone's saying something, you have to be able to respond. And one of the best practices is always getting back to help or home or a human. I should remember that, the 3 H's. So there was another thing that happened that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tay. Has anyone heard of Tay? So Tay was something that was based on a really successful run by Microsoft using Bing to create a female avatar in China that people could talk to and spend time with. And at some point, I think the China version had almost 10 million users. that knew that they were talking to a bot, but it was such a comfortable thing. They were laying in bed and having a really comfortable conversation. And in that interaction, the bot would learn over time and be able to have really good, intimate, nice conversations. And so Microsoft thought, hey, we're going to do that in the US. And so we're going to do it through Facebook. And it's, Tay was called, gosh, I think it stands for something like talk to you or talk at you or something. I can't remember what it stands for. Thinking of you, that's what it is, thinking of you, something like that. So basically Tay AI launched, and within 16 hours, it was taken down. Tay learned pretty quickly to say profane things, to be a racist robot. And this is the lightest one that I could find. I think everything else I had to censor out that I found, but it basically was the worst of the worst and had to be taken down in 16 hours. So that was a big fail. There was another one with IBM Watson, where IBM Watson, you may have heard of, took on Urban Dictionary and started learning all about Urban Dictionary, and then started spitting out profanity in every single message. So you have to be careful what goes in comes out. And so we are all training and educating these AI systems, and they are learning quickly. So that's the other reason. Okay, pop quiz. What are the two types of voice UX approaches? So do you guys remember from that slide I said, if you take one thing away, please remember this. Anyone? This is real, comment.
It was predetermined and natural language.
Okay, good. Anyone else?
Flow-based and the natural language.
Okay, so rules-based, yeah. So both are right. One is rules-based, one is natural language processing. You can think of it as directed dialogue. A lot of people in the industry are saying directed dialogue, and then versus multi-turn dialogue. And again, secret sauce, especially Frederick said, a lot of it's combined in experiences today. So it's not that you just have to use one or the other. The other thing to remember is with AI, there's weak and there's weak or narrow actually, and strong and wide. So the AI that's in place currently is machine learning. It's weak, it's narrow. But there's some benefits to rules-based. And so flow-based or rules-based is a narrow scope. It's a conversation. You have a predetermined response, but it's actually also a consistent experience. And so as long as you're keeping it in context, I think it's good. The intent-based bots, although it's natural language, a lot of times the conversation fails and you need to be able to get back home, back to that human, like I said, and get help if needed. So flow-based is not a bad thing if we want to address it. And I'm not talking about personality too much, but you can have a really easy conversation. The biggest thing with conversation isn't to be funny, but it's to actually get someone to their goal and give them the information that they want. And so there's a lot out there about personality-driven chatbots and how hilarious that is, but really having a good conversation is way more important. So changing behavior is hard, and this was also, some good examples of changing behavior, and one of them is Lark. And I've been using Lark actually, and I think that the experience, even though it's very rules-based, it is extremely flow-based. It is natural feeling, and there's a lot that something like Lark can do. So in this case, it's diabetes prevention, and it's educational, and it feeds you information kind of in a granular manner over time. And so it's been a good experience. Also, they've sent me a free scale, and I'm going to get a free Fitbit, so that's cool. So we'll see how that goes. But Lark is a pretty good example of a rules-based system that works. Another standalone, which is fun just to look at, is Artful Science. And it's just one dialogue script that gets people to some marketing materials. It's not fancy, it's not interactive, it's just funny. And I think this was a great example of just trying it out, writing some witty dialogue if you're an agency, and they have been used as best practice in a lot of articles and things like that. So it's kind of funny, and it's a good practice tool. So it doesn't have to be super, super, super fancy to get started. There's also things like HelloFresh and the ability to order, and a lot of you guys have probably interacted and had good and bad experiences. So I am trying to collect good and bad experiences. Another one that was not US based because I couldn't find it in the US, but it was mentioned, I believe it was Europe, was Nor Soup. So Nor Soup actually came out with a bot. And if you go to Nor Soup, you can sign up for the bot that they're developing in the US right now. And all it did was send recipe ideas out to customers. And Nor Soup sales went up 56% or something like that in the market that it was released in. And I'm still trying to find it. It was an Accenture story, and it's just about sending more content, more ideas, and it increased sales. So there's some just simple ways that something like chat can be used as a channel. So thinking about conversational AI, just to round out the whole actual conversation, actually this should be, I think it's conversational AI is accurate, but it's conversation design. So conversational AI platforms is multi-turn. And we did work with Kaisisto on this. And while we didn't work with them on the entire engagement of that multi-turn interaction, we did think about things like, what are the channels? How does the marketing piece fit in? What is the onboarding going to look at? What is the method? And I'd love to hear a little bit more from even from our team what that experience was like. But I think that understanding that this was one of the first conversational AI platforms, and it was in banking, I remember having conversations like, oh, if you're in a grocery store and you say, hey, what's my bank balance? You don't necessarily want it to spit it out loud unless you're on a Bluetooth headset. And there's times in a car when you do want to interact in a more natural language multi-turn format. So context is super important to where and when you're actually using the product. And one of the things that we had at the time was a low confidence versus high confidence script, which of course is starting to be remedied, but I think that there's still a lot of error messaging and extreme case use cases that need to be acknowledged up front. You have to have workarounds, again, being able to get home, get help, find a human if needed. And, there's just a lot of use case for something like this as a platform now known as Kai to exist in. So that's a great example of a really specific knowledge base, which in this case is banking, that's then used white labeled across a lot of different situations in a lot of different languages. So in the near future, I said I'd talk a little bit about accessibility. Amazon Show actually came out recently with Amazon Echo came out with a show and tell feature where you can actually hold something up in front. It'll tell you step by step, step back, place the item lower, and then you say, Alexa, what am I holding? Or Alexa, what's in my hand? So this came out at the end of last year, and it's game changer. So it can tell you about the product. It can, read for you the ingredients, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very accurate for a number of household products. So this is a big deal, of course, in the blind community, low vision and blind. And so there's a lot of ways that voice technology is helping. We worked with Ellipsis Health to think about how voice actually helps diagnose depression. And again, the onboarding, the tone of the actual both written conversation and directions really helped people feel comfortable, especially when they're sharing a lot of vulnerable information. And there's some stuff that's going on with environmental sound notifications. Of course, because of privacy, not every single sound you want to monitor everything, but Google is looking at opting in certain environmental sounds. And then there's some testing going on with different Garmin watches. And there's a watch called SoundWatch where someone that's deaf can be alerted if an alarm goes off or if there's a loud noise that they should be aware of. So there's a lot of different kinds of alerts, notifications, voice and text interactions that are being developed today that will really help hard of hearing and low vision and blind people in the future. So the truth, though, this is a cartoon that Susan shared with me. Unmasking AI is that It's actually programmed. And right now we're sort of responsible for helping to shape both the languages and the information that is programmed in, and also the interactions that come out of it. So Kat Velos she wrote the foreword for a new Rosenfeld book about conversations with things, which I highly recommend that the group read. We actually have a copy of it. If you guys haven't read it yet, you should. And Kat says in the intro that we cannot create effective digital conversation design unless we understand how to engage in effective and inclusive dialogue as humans. And I thought that was a great way to end the session. And there's some resources at the end, including this chatbot writing and design course, which I actually think we should take. And this was Hillary Black, has a lot of YouTube videos and webcasts out. And actually I found her material to be relevant and actionable and not too heady and helpful. And of course, there's books. This first one, Conversation with Things, has just come out this year. And then there's some classics, Designing Voice User Interfaces. Kathy Pearl works at Google. A friend of ours, Greg Noodleman, wrote a chapter in Smashing Book, which is actually a really great chapter on how to design bots and how to approach it. And then conversational design, and she said conversational design, but that's okay. Erica Hall wrote, and these are kind of the 8 principles. So I've been listening to voicebot.ai, which has 500 or so episodes since 2017 every week on the state of conversation and design and what's happening in the space. And so just to get a primer, there's a couple of really fantastic ones to listen to kind of get up to speed. And that's it. So thank you very much. So do you guys have questions?
I was just going off of